Okay, welcome to WebTuesday tonight at CableCon. I'd like to say a big thank you to Lilo, who organised this room with unexpectedly food and drinks, which is being appreciated. Before I get to tonight, I'm going to spam you all with this moment. In the weekend after next is the first WebTuesday Hack Day on a Saturday at Leap's new offices. So it's going to be worth it just to see how Leap is expanding and threatening Namix. This is, the idea is that this came from something we were doing at local, like days where we spend just hacking on something that anything you want to do, maybe ideally in pairs or small groups. And at the moment it seems very unstructured on the wiki. It structures itself. And it's hopefully, if you're a geek and into hacking and never have enough time to do anything or motivation, it's hopefully a good event. There's also some supporting PHP happening at the same event, so there's enough to keep everyone from being bored, at least for half an hour. I switched to David tonight, who has hacked his presentation. It was a hacked speaker. Thanks for jumping in for Lars, and he's going to be talking about Apache sling.
Yes.
No? Okay.
Yes, apparently.
Hand straight over to you.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I'm going to be talking about Apache sling apparently in 30 minutes. And as mentioned before, it's a hacked presentation since Lars submitted this talk and came up with the title, and so I had to do a little bit of modifications on that. That being said, it's not all that much modification. The new name for microjacks is Apache sling, so I'll be talking about the same stuff. I don't know whether I'm going to get through in 30 minutes. I don't know how Lars does it. I probably won't be able to do that. And as I said, instead of Lars, you end up with me. I wear sort of 3 hats, and I think all of them are sort of equally important tonight. First of all, I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Day Software. I'm also a member of the Apache Software Foundation and the committer on the Jackrabbit project. And I am also the specification lead of JSR 170 and JSR 283, which is the content repository for Java Technology API trademark, according to Sun. So before I get started, I really want to make sure that everybody knows what they get themselves into tonight. If you don't know anything about HTML, JavaScript, or you don't have an idea what REST or a content repository is, this is a good time to leave. What I'm going to talk about tonight and what I'm going to try to show you is, first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about JCR, since not everybody in here might know JCR, might know the content repository API for Java Technology. I'll be very brief on that. Then I'll talk about what's JCR's relevance in terms of REST and Ajax. And after that, I'm going to talk a little bit about building a real-life application. TSS stands for the server side. It's a Java community, and it's just rebuilding that as a content application in real life. So you see how stupid I am. I'm going to code in front of you while being taped, which is about the dumbest idea you can come up with. So what's JCR? JCR started out as JSR 170 and JSR 283. As I mentioned before, this is the content repository API for Java Technology. And now a lot of you guys may think of, when they think of content or content repositories, they think of CMS or boring stuff and so forth. And I really would like to try to give you a totally new spin on things tonight. But nevertheless, what's JCR? And this is what we submitted originally in 2000 or 2001, I think it was, when we submitted JSR 170. It says it's an API that allows an API consumer, a programmer, to interact with the content repository in a vendor-neutral fashion. Now, still, that doesn't give you a lot of insight on what a content repository is. So here's my best pitch. I basically say it's the best of both worlds between relational databases and file systems, plus all this other stuff that we always needed and never had. So to give you a little bit of an idea what that means, there is a couple of things that most of you probably, when they develop applications, use relational databases. So I'm going to contrast the content repository in comparison to relational databases. Obviously, the content repository has all the good stuff that a relational database has, the relational model, queries, transactions, integrity, everything you look for from a relational database. I'm not going to even talk about that. The more interesting things, for example, is that the content repository supports the concept of hierarchies. By that, I mean if you have on your left-hand side of your navigation, if you have a tree, you don't have to put some extra coding in place to actually get that tree to work. It's really the content repository understands what a hierarchy is. Another thing that I really see in every application is what I call a multi-value property. And you all know that. You have an array of checkboxes. Somebody giving the opportunity to the end user to check 5, 6 things in a relational database. That basically means you have 2 tables, you have joins. It starts getting messy. Or another thing, explicit sort order. Somebody says A comes before B. You have a web navigation or anything like that where the business user decides, based on no particular characteristic, that something comes before something else. You'll have to do it yourself in a relational database. You come up with a rank field, and then you come up with a smart sorting algorithm, and until you have 10,000 items, and then you find out that your sorting algorithm wasn't that smart to begin with, then you come up with a smarter one on leaving gaps and inserting stuff and so forth. You shouldn't worry about these things. So these are kind of the small things, but then there are also big things in a content repository, like full text search or versioning or access control. And really the biggest feature, and by that I mean, in relational databases in real life, you always build your access control layer yourself. You decide who can see what part of the data, who can write what data. You don't leave it up to the relational database. You're going to build it yourself. Versioning is not even considered. Full text search is sort of supported by some databases, but nowhere close to a standardization. And the biggest difference, the single biggest difference between a relational database and the content repository is that the content repository allows you to work in an unstructured fashion. And this is a paradigm shift, and I can't, even if I'd use up all the time just talking about this tonight, I can't even stress how important this is. This means you don't start with the ERD anymore. It's really forget your data structure, you start differently. And this is a whole paradigm shift. But you'll see the difference. Now, again, what's JCR? JCR tries to standardize how you interact with a content repository. Now, what we did at the very beginning, when we launched JCR, we asked a number of vendors, and by the way, there were about 50, in the meantime, almost 70 individuals in the expert group. We asked everybody to come up with a JSP snippet that would list documents in a folder, which is something that everybody does in every project that they do. And basically, this is what people came back with. And I don't want to go into details on why this is good or why this is not good. But everybody had something completely different. And there are over 800 active APIs that are maintained in the market. And really the one goal of JCR is to replace all these proprietary APIs with a consistent standardized interface. Now, again, the functional elevator pitch is really that. For JCR, we have a level 1 that reads, exports, and queries a content repository, a level 2 that writes, imports, and does access control, and then there is a number of optional features like transactions or observation or versioning or locking. Now, a repository is fully compliant if it complies with all these things. We're in good shape for version 2.0 of the standard, and one thing that I think is very important to me is how the market reacts to the content repository. And I think the biggest kick that I got out of this recently was when I typed content repository, just the 2 terms, into Google, and 8 out of the first 10 mentions came back pointing to JCR. And that just means that the term content repository became synonymous with the standardization of JCR. And this happened with relational databases as well. If you punch in databases, guess what? 90% of the stuff that comes back is pointing to relational databases. Or if you punch in app servers, 90% will be J2EE app servers. But this market adoption was very important to us. Then obviously it's important to see that a lot of vendors are backing JCR in terms of being compliant with the specification from a repository level. But what's really important is to see how many new applications are being built on top of the API and how many applications you can use on top of a content repository that's standards compliant. Because ultimately, it doesn't matter how many database vendors you have. Actually, you want as few as possible, but you want as many applications as possible sitting on top of that standard. Now, this is obviously nobody has to register anything, so we just see the tip of the iceberg, really. What the only thing that we can judge is really how fast new applications show up, how many new applications we get in the course of a year. And what we see so far is that the speed of applications that come out has increased over the years and will increase even more over the next couple of years. So we see a very good future for this iceberg here. Now, let me jump to the next topic here, which is where we throw REST and the web into the mix and what that has to do with JCR and why a content repository is the ideal store for your web applications. And this is where I'm really going to introduce Sling as the silver bullet here. When we talk about REST, we talk about a concept that was documented by Roy in 2000 in his thesis. And when we talk about JCR, we talk about the content repository API that we've been talking about so far. The interesting thing is that both Roy and I work for Day as a Swiss company, which is a bit of a strange thing if you put things into context. But it certainly makes sense. Let me quickly tell you why this makes sense. Now, on the one end, we have JCR, and I kind of put the problem on top of this slide, and I say the problem is JCR, which kind of may sound strange, considering that I'm responsible for this problem. Now, the problem with that is the same problem that we have with all the J2EE specifications that are mainly driven by implementers who basically want to make their life easy and put the burden on the application developer to go figure things out. Now, if we have JCR on the one side and on the other side, I put on my different hat, my developer hat, and I just want to build a web app. So what am I going to do? And I just want to be fast and quick and efficient at my application development. So I still have this long-term, stable, durable, heavy-duty, whatnot, scalable JCR on the one end, and I have me on the other side. I'm a lazy, short-sighted hack that's easily confused, and that's really my developer persona, and everybody who worked with me can totally attest to that. It's totally the case. Now, what I need is a projection that allows me to be quick and efficient on the front end and basically project that into my heavyweight, heavy-duty environment that I can use in a scalable environment. And this is where Sling comes in. Sling really is this very simple projection that just works for me for developing web apps. To give you a little bit of an idea about Sling, Sling is currently in the Apache incubator, and that's probably the best description that we came up with so far. It's a JCR-backed REST WebKit or REST web development framework. It employs technologies as OSGIs and object content mapping and so forth. And it really allows you to develop your web application, whatever language you'd like to use. And those are just a few languages that are currently supported in Sling. And there is one thing that I'm going to focus today, and that's really how to build your application entirely client-sided. So basically, we're going to look at how we can use technologies that we normally only know from the server side to build an application entirely client-sided, and that's what we formerly called micro Ajax, and that's what this session was scheduled or was planned as. To give you a little bit of an idea on how microJax or Sling works, it's basically on the browser side of things. We have a very lightweight, couple of hundred lines of JavaScript code to interact with the server. And on the server side, let me quickly go through that. To read content from the server, I should say. So the client-side API is really just to pull information from the server, and we have generic, normal forms to write any content into the content repository. On the server side, we have you can look at it as if we have a servlet there that takes care of all the information that's coming back and forth, and in the back end, we have all the heavyweight processing in the content repository. Now, the important thing about that is that the layers 1 and 2 are very cheap and simple and very straightforward. Those are a couple of hundred lines each. It's really nothing. And all the heavy lifting is really done by the content repository. So there's a couple of things that I want to talk to you guys about. And this is talking about REST and talking about why things are done the wrong way in the web. A lot of people, when they develop applications in their web application frameworks, forget that the URL has meaning, and they basically just use the URL as a tunnel or a string to pass in information back and forth between the client and the server. But it actually has semantic meanings, and this is a very typical URL that I see all the time, people addressing their JSPs or their servlets or their controllers or whatever their web framework gives them. And I'm passing some ID, which is either a product ID here, for example, or a session ID or continuations or anything nasty. This is actually exactly the way how you shouldn't be developing stuff for the web. So first of all, you shouldn't be addressing the script. You should address the resource. You should address the content that you work with or the data that you work with as the primary thing to be interacting with. The second thing is, why the heck would I be on the client side be interested in what technologies you use on the server side? So why the heck is this extension .jsp? You're not transmitting a JSP. You're transmitting HTML most of the time. So this extension better be HTML. And then the next thing is really, you just pass the this object. If you think in object orientation, this is totally procedural programming. You basically have your process, which is your product JSP, and you pass in a bunch of parameters, and that's exactly the wrong thing to do. Now, if we look at how Sling deals with the URL and why this is important, then this is really reclaiming the original ideas on how you should work in a RESTful manner. So if we look at what happens if I have a Sling URL here, then the first thing that Sling does is it maps the first part of the URL onto a hierarchical tree of nodes. So we'll map this to my S4 here. So that's really it. And then I will use the second part of the URL to basically find out what method to execute or how to execute a particular script on the server side. Now, mind you, obviously, the extension maps to the MIME type, the way how it should be, and it certainly makes sense that way because I'm looking at the details of an S4 here, and that's exactly the way it should be. Now, as I mentioned before, I'll show you in the examples afterwards. I'll show you what we call a data-first approach, and that means you first shove in the data, and you'll care about the structure later if you need to. And this is entirely different from what you're used to from relational databases, where to even store a single bit of information, you first have to come up with your structure. Otherwise, there's no way how you can ever store anything. Of course, JCR also supports the structure-first approach, but that's exactly missing the point. I mean, of course, you can do things the wrong way, but you shouldn't if you can do it the right way. So what I'd like to show you today is really, I'd like to show you how I get started from scratch. And by from scratch, I mean really from scratch. So I have an empty desktop. I downloaded what's called CRX Quick Start, which is our commercial version of Apache Jackrabbit plus Sling. And it's just a nice packaging, but everything you see will work just as well with Sling. So this computer has no repository installed, does know nothing about anything, and all I need to do now to get started is really just to double-click this. And this is installing Sling, installing Jackrabbit, and a bunch of other stuff right on my computer as we look at it. Now, the important thing is, obviously, this is a nice packaging, but really, as I said, you can check out the Subversion sources yourself. And you see you'll have to license things to get a trial license. I have a trial license right here. Otherwise, you can just fill out the form below and you get an email with the trial license in case you want to do that yourself. Or you can build, as I said, the whole thing yourself. Now, this is it. It's installed, up and running, Sling, OSGI container, the entire scripting engines, the content repository, everything is there. So if we look at the content repository, and this is basically just to give you a little bit of an idea on what we have in here, you'll see that we have an empty repository really that we look at, and we already have a little bit of basic content stored in here. What we can do now, this is just to give you a little bit of an idea on how the content repository works. You go in here, you say create a new node, call this my test node, give it a type. The type is NT unstructured right here, and I'll save that. And this basically means that I would save it normally. So I'll give it another shot. Let me quickly try to get a new session. Here we go. All right. So I'll create my test node again. And I'll add a little property to the test node right now. So I can say I create a new property. And I chose the type NT unstructured now. That means I can store any property and any child node into this and just go ahead. So I can say I want to store a particular color, and I say that my color is green. Or I can even say, well, you know what? I got multiple colors. So it's green or red or blue. Oops. And after doing that, I'm basically done. I persisted this information and I didn't do any structuring whatsoever. And now I can go into a search, for example, and search the content repository for the term green. And I can do that either in SQL or XPath. I can go in and version the information, et cetera, et cetera. This is just to give you a little bit of an idea on what the content repository can do for you. Obviously, as I said, access control, everything's taken care of. Now, obviously, this is not the easiest way to interact with the content repository. If you want to dump a number of documents into the content repository, which is what a lot of people use content repositories for as replacements for file systems, for example, then you can basically just connect to the content repository and say, well, here in my test node, I'd like to just drop in stuff, right? And I have a bunch of files in here that I want to dump in here. Let me quickly do that. And I'll just drop, oh, maybe this was a little bit too much. 1,600 files. Yeah, that's what you get when you don't look at stuff before you dump it in. All right, I see. So, okay, I think you get the point. Let's quickly see how Mac behaves, how Mac OS behaves when we stop the copying here. But you'll get the point. And since this is multi-threaded, this will all work okay. So we got the stuff folder in here, and we got a bunch of stuff in here that we filled into that. Now the question is, so how am I going to go about developing an application now on top of this content repository that I have? And actually, that's a very simple task. So when we start here we find a sample application, and that's what I'm going to walk you through. So the first thing that you want to do from your application is you want to write content into the content repository. So we're going to look at a simple write operation. And to give you a little bit of an idea what that looks like in real life, I'll basically go back to my content repository mount here, where I basically just mounted the content repository as a file system, as you guys may have noticed, and I take this first steps application and just drop it into my text editor. So if we look at the text editor, we see we have a write form, and this is basically the form that we look at right here, and this is how we write content to the repository. Content write test, this is a test, and we select the color green. Now the interesting thing about that is if you look at the code that we have here to write to the content repository, you'll see it's just HTML. There is really nothing. There is no single line of code. All there is if you look at the form action, you see it's a post to /content/first steps. So that's really it. So if I hit the submit button here, that's what happened. And obviously, since I didn't define what should happen after that, it's basically just dumping this output right here. So I can now look at the content that we just wrote into the content repository right here, and you see there is a color, a description, and a title, and this is all we need to do. Now it's very important to understand that this is not a security problem or anything, because we're authenticated against the repository. All the security is correct. If I can't write that, because of my access controls, I can't write that. So there is no fishy thing going on here, and this is not just working in my closed environment. This works for a real-life web app, no problem. This is totally different than giving the client the JDBC connection or anything like that. This is absolutely safe and secure. So let's quickly look at how we read something from the content repository. And keep in mind, we're talking about reading from the repository to the client side. This is about building Ajax applications. So if we look at our read example here, I'll quickly go back. This is the reading example. This is now what we just put into the repository. We want to read that out and we want to display it on the client side. Keep in mind, we don't want to do anything on the server side. We want zero execution on the server side. So this is all client side. So the interesting thing is what we do now is we basically include this, and we basically say we want to get this node here. And we have, because it's nice and a lot of debugging, you see that we basically then document, write things out. Very simple, very straightforward to do that. Now I'll just quickly walk you through a couple of other examples. Now there is an example of how we can add new content to the repository instead of just writing it. So we go to add new content node, another test, and this one, we leave this one red, and this one another 2, and we make this green. So if we now go look at the content repository again here, and we see that we stored something in entries, and we have an entry called this is another, and this is another 2. Basically just what I entered, and we see the properties that we'd expect in here. Nothing special. And the important thing is that if we look at our code here, then the only difference to the example that we looked at in the very beginning is that it says /entry/star at post, and that basically just means create something new for me. Create a new node underneath /entries, and we still got title description. There is not a single line of JavaScript code or anything in here. Then the last piece is basically listing all these entries and going through them. So if you need to do a blog, for example, that has all your blog entries, you'd go about it this way. Now, if we look at the code, and first of all, if we look at the, let me quickly, if we look at the list here, then we basically see that we got this list with our 2 entries, and we even got the remove button and so forth. And I think you guys all get how that works. It's basically we do a get content of all the entries at the depth to, and we document write all of this. And as you can see here already, this is about as much fun as writing servlet code, obviously, just escaping all the stuff, and it's really annoying to do that. So it really sucks, really. So what I want is I want a way to, and this is now the first time that I'm just going to show you the server-side syntax of doing things, but this is just for the heck of the syntax, is I just want something like this that I can use to output content much more efficiently than always going document write this, document write that. Now this is JavaScript on the server side. It's obvious how this works. Now let's take one step back, and I'll basically show you how it works on the client side and how we can get a very efficient application going. So we already went through all that, and this basically takes me to the last bullet point on the agenda. And I just want to mention one thing, and this is basically the theme of what we call our JCR cup, which is basically take, sling, and build a content application of your choosing. And since we're doing this in cooperation with the server side, one of the ideas that we had is that you can rebuild the server side with a lot more community, a lot more interaction as a content application in a very efficient manner. So basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to transform the server-side.com into a microJax JCR-backed content application with no tools. Basically, the only tools that I'm going to use is a text editor and a browser, and that's it. And obviously, a content repository, a Sling-enabled content repository. And because I'm going to do this sitting here and I'm going to do it real life, we need buddy coding. And basically, if you guys see a bug before I see it, or see me type a mistake before I see it, feel free to report it, and you can send me an invoice for a beer right after this session for each bug that you guys find. And trust me, there will be bugs, so there's beer to be won. All right, so the demo is basically, I have this empty repository that we just installed, and what I want to do is I want to start from scratch and build an application into this. So what I have right here, and I'm going to show you, is I have a bunch of statically stored HTML from the server side, which is basically just their HTML. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to dump this in here. And luckily, this is not 1,600 files, but just a bunch of files. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the content that I just dropped in here. Now I'm looking at it already in the content repository. So the first thing I just threw all this stuff in the content repository, and I'm looking at it. And this is straight up HTML, and obviously I'm looking at my tss.html right here, which is the main page of the server side. I have a static dump of this post file. I have actually a static dump of an individual thread view. And I have, actually, Joe from the server side sent me this. This is how the backend, this is what the backend looks like of the server side. So this is how they administer the new posts. So my goal is now, and actually, when I'm not doing this, but other people do this, my goal is to do this in 15 minutes, to start really from scratch, from this blank HTML, and basically get through in 15 minutes to a working application with the approval process and everything in place that actually looks the same again, obviously. So let's get started. So the first thing that you would have to do is you'd have to be able to submit some content. So the first thing that I'm going to work on is the post form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my trusty text editor right here, and I'm going to use the post form. And this is basically just the post HTML stuff. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to rename this HTML, instead of just being HTML, I'm going to call it a JavaScript template. I'm going to use only client-side execution. There is still no server-side execution of any of this. So I'm going to say I'm going to have a post.jst, and now all I need to do really is I need to find that form where you can basically submit that content, which is here. And I'm basically just going to say, well, you know what, instead of that, I'm going to post it to /content/tss/blog, well, let's call it /posts, for example. And this is basically where I want things to go. So if somebody fills in a new post, I want it to go into this directory. And that's really it. And just because I'm lazy, I also want to put in some created date. So I'm just going to put it like this, and I'm going to call it created, and I'm going to have it a type equal hidden. And that basically just means that I also store a created date. Now there is one more thing, because I want to reuse this also for editing. I basically have the possibility to include this this magic thing here that says basically I want to populate the form with the values that are stored in the content repository, and this is really all I need to do. So this is what it took for me to, from an existing real-life application, I mean, I did not manipulate the HTML. This is just from a normal, regular HTML mockup to get to the point where I could, if I didn't make any mistakes, post new content into the repository. So let's say this is my title. So let's see what and this is my summary. And just to make it a little bit more interesting, we're going to do this, and this is my body. Whatever. All right. And this is it. And now let's close our eyes. And it seems like everything has gotten stored. Now you'll see that if you look at this, there was a whole slew of stuff in that form, and I just don't care. See, that's the unstructured of unstructured. It's really, I don't care how it's structured, and I don't care what you store. I mean, just store stuff, and I'll look at it later, maybe, if I'm interested. So basically, this is basically what happened. So the next step is, now that I got this, I want to approve it, right? So it shows up on the front page at a certain point in time. So I'm going to go to my admin screen here, rename this again to admin.jst, and then I'm going to go look for the form again. So let's see where that form is. Here it is. So usually when I find the form, there needs to be some sort of a list somewhere, and the list is right here. And now check this out. This is really, I'm still on the client, right? But I'm using the server-side syntax here to produce stuff, just because I don't want to write document write all the time. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get the posts, and this is client-side JavaScript. So I'm going to do a sling.getContent, and this basically uses me authenticated against the repository to get the content. So if I don't have the right to read a particular section of the repository, I'm not going to get anything, even if I'm trying to. So this is how it's going to work. So, and I'm going to say I want it 2 levels steep, and now all I need to do is I need to iterate through the post here, and now I say var post equal posts square bracket a, and that's really it. So all I need to do is I need to plug this in here, and I need to output a little bit of content. Now since obviously we have a link here to that particular piece of content, I basically want to do that again. So we have a link to that content and we can edit it. So this is posts, TSS posts / slash square bracket A. And now we want to go to the post form again, .html. So the thing that we want to change there is obviously we still here want to output the title of that. So this is post.title. And then we say we have a created date just for the heck of it. It's post.created. There's one more thing. We have these checkboxes. If we go look at, I don't know whether I already changed it. If I already changed it, we're host. Yeah, I already changed it. So there's one more thing. We have these little checkboxes where you can say whether you want to promote things or not. And I just want to store that value into an approved property, whether it's approved or not, and whether it should show up on the main screen. So basically, all I'm going to say is I want this to be addressed like that. And keep in mind, I'm just changing the name here. And I just basically say I have an approved property here, and this is yes, or something like that. And now again, I obviously need to get rid of this whole slew of information here that we still have in there from the static HTML save. Let me quickly see. I think it's even go further down. Yep, I think this is it. And at the end of the form, since I want to magically populate things based on the content repository input, so I want to have the checkboxes set for all the approved ones, and I don't want them to be set for the non-approved ones, I need to put in this sling wizard. And this will automatically populate it from the repository. All right, so that now just means that if I go back to my content here, and if I didn't make a mistake, which chances are very low, then this is what I get. Chances were not as low as I thought. So I get this is my title thing because this is what I entered. I get my check boxes. I get my last modified date. So I'm good. So let's just approve this one. And we see that this will change the approved value of this particular blog entry that I just wrote. So that means we can go forward to the front end, to actually looking at the server side. And I'll basically do that because I know that I'm going to iterate through things again by going to the TSS HTML. And just to give you again, before I mess with that, give you a little view of the home page here, which is going to be the next thing that I'm going to be doing, where I basically just need a list of all that. I'll basically go in here and change that again to tss.jst. That's really all I need to do. And now I need to find the right place to cut, and I think it's right here. And obviously I need to iterate through things again. So I get my post here, and here the reference needs to go to the thread view of that particular post. So again, it goes to /content/tss/posts a and .thread.html. So I want to see the thread view of the post that I'm just looking at. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to have the post title here, and let's just copy that, put that here on the post created, and right here for the actual summary. Since I don't have any forms to populate here, I don't need to worry about my sling wizard thing going on, because I think this is all taken care of since there are no forms on here. And let me just quickly see if I can find the end of this, which I think is right here. And I need to close my for loop up there. So I think we're good, with the exception of the fact that we don't care about the approved flag yet. I mean, we just iterating through things. We don't care about the approved flag. So this is very simple. It's just if not approved. Oh well, let's do it right. If post approved is not equal to yes, then continue. So that's really all I need to do for the front page, and if I didn't make any major mistakes, I don't know whether I approved it actually, then I should be able to now go back and basically say, well, give me the tss.html. So this is basically my new front page, and my link will go to the thread view. Now the last thing, the only remaining thing that we need to take care of is the thread view. So again, as you may have guessed, I'm going to rename this to JST, and this one's even simpler than everything else we did before. So the only thing that I need to do here is I basically need to find the right place to cut here. Let me quickly see if I can find that. Here it is. And all I need to say is I'm working on my current node, which is basically identified by our path. So I basically just say current node.title. And down here I say current node dot created, and down here I say current node dot body, and that's it. So I think if everything went according to plans, I should be able to click here and see this thread view of this one thread with just the body in it. And really, this is it. So what I can do now is I can really go back into my post here, say I have another post, a nasty unapproved one. I can post this, and obviously I could put in a proper redirect here. I can go to my admin screen, admin things, and you see something is, this is already approved, that we approved before, this one is not. And now just for the heck of it, I can go to tss.html here, and I see obviously the one that's not approved is not showing up. Obviously, just to try it out, if I go back here, now it should be showing up. And this is the nasty unapproved post with everything in it. So this is just to give you an idea on how we, and literally we did not doctor up the HTML or anything. It's really just clean cut HTML the exact way how it was on the server side. And this is just to give you a little bit of an idea how you get from scratch, including installing all the software you need to do this without any development tools whatsoever, without any server-side execution of any code, to come to a really restful. If you look at the URLs, if you look at all the features from back buttons to the usual Ajax nightmares, this is all taken care of. This is a clean application. This is not something nasty. But really, this was just to show you how quickly you can get started and how quickly and how lightweight the whole thing is without having to deal with all the heavyweight J2EE environment to begin with. And this is one thing that I want to mention as the very tail end of this discussion, is that by moving the entire execution to the client, you basically take out the pain out of Java hosting, because literally there is no Java hosting. There is no execution on the server side. You don't need to worry about a stupid programmer doing an infinite loop or anything like that. They can do that all day long. They burn the CPU of the client, not of your server, so you don't care. And that's really the important piece about this, and that's why we've seen about 3 or 4 paradigm shifts in this demo. On the one end, we didn't do any data modeling or whatsoever. We just didn't care. We just started coding. And the second thing was we didn't use any server-side execution. So basically, if you remember only 2 things from this demo, then I'd really recommend that you go to dev.data.com. You can download this package just the way I used it today and build your own application. and you can register for the JCR Cup and win a MacBook Pro. And the second thing is you obviously can make your next real-life application a content application, and that does not necessarily mean that it all has to be client-sided. You can use server-sided technologies as much as you want, but really leverage the content repository. I think it's much more than you may think it is today. All right, thanks a lot. I hope I made it almost through in half an hour. So thank you for your attention.
Questions?
Sure.
Since it's always client side, what stops me from just modifying the form on the client side and just posting the approved as well when I initially create the post?
Access control. And access control is a matter of configuration on your server. So on your repository, you go in and you say user X has these privileges, user Y has these privileges. So the anonymous user that you'd be here would only have write privileges to a certain section of the repository or to certain attributes. And this is, I mean, obviously the way I modeled it right now, if it was to be used in production, for access control reasons, I probably would structure things slightly differently. I basically would say there is a public trash bin where basically everybody can post their stuff to, and then basically the administrator or whoever is responsible for that whole thing is the only guy who has write access to what's really published on the website. And then there would be a move from one bucket into the other bucket. But really the fundamental thing is that you have access control and that you can use that access control as a configuration piece. So you decide on the repository side, the anonymous user only has write access to this portion. And if you don't include the approved flag in there, then they can't write to it. So that's a funny thing. It's really safe. It's not like a JDBC connection to the client side, which would be idiotic, obviously.
Sling is the content repository, or it's an implementation.
No, Jackrabbit is the content repository. Sling is this web layer that we now saw on top of it that allows you to script things to basically build your application, your web application, your RESTful web application on top of the content repository.
Jackrabbit, some question is Jackrabbit. Like, how do you cope with stuff like, scaling? Can you put multiple instances around and spread your content?
That's an implementation detail, obviously, and the Jackrabbit and CRX that we use here are clusterable and horizontally scalable. There is a variety of different persistence layers for Jackrabbit and for CRX. Jackrabbit has a lot of different database backends, and there are even people who built S3 backends. And for the demo that we used right now, we actually stored everything in a tar file. So you basically have the entire persistence of the content repository stored in a tar file. So you can basically take that tar file, back it up, and you're done. And that's really a very beautiful piece of technology that we put into CRX. So you don't even need a relational database backing, not even an embedded relational database for that. And that gives you tremendous benefits when it comes to things like backup. Just a regular file system mechanisms will do for backup and restore, and it's obviously like 5-6 times faster than an embedded database and 10-20 times faster than your traditional commercial relational database.
And the server-side part of Sling translates the Ajax to JCR API, I guess, and expands the JSTs.
Yes.
Okay. So that's like the bracket % stuff. That's the server-side part of Sling.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
You have a JavaScript engine in there.
On the server side, for the JST stuff, no. But we do have, we do have Rhino built in there. But for the translation, we don't need that. I mean, all we need to do is we basically need to escape the brackets into document rights essentially, and having a smart mechanism to include that on the client side. But there is a server-side JavaScript engine, but it's not used for this.
Okay. What's it used for?
To allow you server-side JavaScript. So exactly the same thing I did. I can take these scripts and basically, instead of calling them the .jst, I just call them .esp, and that basically means it's ECMAScript pages, and that basically means that they're executed on the server. And I don't need to change anything. Literally, I can do that. Just open the thread view, for example, and basically just change the extension, and that just means that now I'm executing on the server. And imagine how powerful that is as a concept. You basically can just decide which side of the fence you want to make your changes, or you want to run things. So if I basically go to this thread.jst and rename this, and I haven't done that before, so it may blow up in my face. Chances are very high, actually. Last time I did something on a presentation that I haven't tried exactly before, it blew up in my face. So basically, the thread view now should be rendered on the server side. And it is. You see it's even broken. But generally, it is now rendered on the server side. I don't know what this is, but I think I know what it is. It's actually outputting the calendar, the created date calendar, as an actual calendar object in Java. So, hey, we found a bug. But actually, it is executing on the server side, and it's outputting the body, it's outputting the title. So generally, it's working. The date is broken. But that's really what Rhino and the JavaScript engine is used for, to allow you server-side scripting in JavaScript. We also allow server-side scripting in all sorts of different languages, from Groovy to Scala to you name it. Everything that's fun. It's very easy to build plugins for Sling as well. I mean, if you have a language that we don't support yet, you can build a handler yourself very easily.
So this brings me to a question. What's about, so do you project for customers, real project on the client side? So like you did now?
To be honest with you, we don't. And it's just because we don't care too much. Now, the thing, I mean, I don't care if the customers want to burn their CPU, they can burn their CPU. Now, it's almost mind-boggling, because if you do things on the client side, you're more efficient, because obviously every new client that comes brings their own CPU to the table, so you don't have a scaling problem. The only thing that you have to be able to produce is you scale up the repository, but you don't really care about the complexity of the presentation application. It is indexable. It's very well indexable, actually, because we distribute, or we basically take the content repository node and do a standard HTML rendition that is indexed by all the spiders, so search engine optimization is better, I would venture, than if you do it on the server side. Things like back buttons and all that kind of stuff is taken care of as well. So it's a really clean way of doing things. I have not found a reason yet, except for maybe WAI or some accessibility stuff. But then again, the standard HTML that we produce is probably better readable by screen readers and so forth than anything magic that you'd come up with. So, but really, I haven't found a reason not to use this. It's a very exotic way of dealing with things, and that's probably why I didn't waste much time trying to sell it to customers yet. So it's a bit of a toy, and we'll see. But really, there is no reason not to use it. I think there is always a combination of doing things, obviously, on the client side. I mean, for every Ajax application, you can get access to the repository and being able to retrieve arbitrary data out of the content repository, both just traversing the content or searching the content, or just for the usual stuff that you use Ajax for. This is perfect because you get transparent access to the repository. Whether I'd use this JST syntax is a different story, but we definitely use client-side access to the repository in in many cases, that's for sure.
Why micro?
It's a long story. When we started Sling was, it was kind of the big, fat, and ugly brother of the JCR API, basically. So it had OSGI, it had object content mapping, it had all this heavyweight stuff around it. And then a couple of the hacks in the group thought it would be great to make something more lightweight, and that's what we called micro sling at the time. And because of Ajax and micro sling, it was called micro Jax in the beginning. And now we convinced the entire Sling developer community again that this should be how Sling should really be. And so we basically merged micro Sling and micro Jax back into Sling, and so we could drop all our additional names and just call it Sling. So it's really, it was a good evolution.
How long has this been around for?
A couple of weeks. It's brand new. Hey, this is what we're here for. No, the ideas have been around for a while, but really today will be the first time that this package where everything is packaged up nicely is available. So the first time you can download it off of our website is today. So not for very long.
So when I put binary files in the repository, I can assume that they live as binary assets somewhere in this tar file. So
Yeah.
and if I put some properties, they end up in some tables.
Well, tables is a bit of a far-fetched. Let's just say the tar file is not really a tar file. It's basically a list of entries that are stored in a tar file format. But as much as you don't care how MySQL or Derby or whatever, how they store their stuff, we thought for our persistence manager, you don't care either. But then we thought, do we want to make up a new format that is a journal, essentially, that just writes down what happened? And we thought, no. Why don't we just use one that everybody already knows and everybody has tools in case you should ever need to extract that and do things with it or back it up. And system administrators are very comfortable with tar files. They can do just about anything with tar files. So if we come up with our own proprietary format, what's the benefit? Nothing. So we just use tar. That's it. So we basically, if you write a property, actually what happens is, of one node, we put all the properties into what's called a bundle, and that's the entity that's being stored as a virtual file, if you wish, into the tar file. And you can then extract that individual node again and look at it if you really feel like it. But it's as much fun as looking into the file that a database creates for you. It's something that you really don't want to do. But it's really, you can look at it as if everything is stored in that tar file, as mind-boggling as it is.
Including, say, thumbnails, or how would you...
Everything.
How would you implement something like thumbnails?
How would I implement something like thumbnails?
Yeah, like so, yeah.
We have a product that's called digital asset management that basically whenever you drop something into the repository, you have a mechanism called observation. And it basically means that you can hook into the repository and be notified if something is dropped in. So you get notification that somebody dropped in a new file. And actually what we do, we, for example, do full text extraction of PDFs and Word documents and whatnot. And our digital asset management basically just hooks in a separate listener and basically says, well, if somebody drops in an image, then I'm going to extract that image and I'm going to produce a thumbnail. And I'm actually going to store the thumbnail as meta information to that file because I can extend the file and basically say, well, now I have an additional folder of thumbnails as meta information to that file. So you actually, if you look at the hierarchy, you have the file, and underneath the file you have a folder again with a bunch of thumbnails in it. But that's just because the richness of the modeling capabilities of the content repository allows you to do such things that you can't do in a file system. Obviously, in a file system, you can't put a folder underneath a file. But in the content repository, you totally can. And so that's, for example, one way of implementing thumbnails. Another way is to just basically produce them at runtime, scale things down. Yeah, so, and I think people can come up with any number of additional ways of dealing with it. But you can have binary meta information, no problem, or structured hierarchical meta information.
Okay.
Cool.
Thanks a lot, Dave.
No problem. Thank you.